You're listening to B2B Tech Talk with Ingram Micro, where we share topics that will inspire business growth and help you stay ahead of advances in technology before they become mainstream. This episode is sponsored by Ingram Micro Xvantage, the game-changing platform that will transform your business potential and reshape how customers see you. On today's episode of B2B Tech Talk, we'll be chatting with Carla Johnson, who is a global keynote speaker, a best-selling author, and a recognized marketing and innovation strategist. Her work with Fortune 500 brands served as the foundation for her many books, and her 10th book, Rethink Innovation, busts the myth that innovation is something that requires a specific degree or specific training. In fact, Carla explains why, to be a successful company in today's hyper-competitive, customer-driven world, innovation must be everyone's business. Her goal is to teach 1 million people how to become innovators by 2025. Will you be one of them? Carla, thank you so much for joining B2B Tech Talk today. How have you been?
Oh, I'm great. And thank you so much for having me, Nina. I'm delighted to be here. This is one of my favorite things to talk about.
Oh my goodness. Well, first, before we dive in, because we are going to be sharing some great information and guidance to our listeners about the innovative process, which you are so masterful at. But before we jump in, I know that your 10th book, Rethink Innovation, you've been traveling the world. What are people saying at this specific time about innovation?
It's been so interesting, Nina. I think one of the things that we've all seen in these last 3-4 years is the need to be able to adjust with the times. And sometimes that happens very, very quickly. And that pressure from the outside, whether it's circumstances we can't control or whether it's changing customer expectations, it just has a new pressure point on the outside, from the outside of companies, that we have to be able to respond to change. And my good friend Pete Sheehan says that whenever the pace of change on the outside of an organization is faster than the pace of change inside an organization, that's when you really, really risk becoming obsolete, getting left behind, and having all of your competitors just zoom right by you. And so those are the kind of conversations that I'm having with leaders in all areas of the business, is how do we make sure we not just keep pace with change on the outside, but how do we make sure that all of our people across the board are equipped to do their job better, faster, more efficiently? Now, that doesn't always mean cutting budgets, people, and teams, but making the most of the time that they do have so everybody can perform at the level they know an organization is capable of.
I hear a lot when I talk about innovation to different groups of people. It means different things to different groups, but the one thing that is consistent is the myth that it is a certain person within the organization responsible for innovating. It's R&D. That's their responsibility. But I'm also reminded of one of my favorite movies called Big, and Tom Hanks, right? He plays the 13-year-old who turns into a grown-up. And my favorite scene is in the boardroom when his nemesis in the movie, Paul, who works at the toy company, head of marketing,
Right.
says, "We have the data that shows that a robot that turns into a building is going to be the next big thing." And he raises his hand and he says, "I don't get it. I don't get it." And he goes on to talk about, we need an insect, a robot that turns into an insect. And then everybody's nodding, but it's that childlike imagination that he brings to the table that is what ends up winning the day. So, talk to us and guide us through, how do we start the process, and who are innovators?
I like to say that innovation is everybody's business. And I think at heart, we are always those Tom Hanks kind of thinkers, because we were all kids once, right? But I think as we've gone through school and as we've gone through our careers, we've just kind of been taught and trained and rewarded out of that kind of thinking. And I think in a lot of cases, especially if you look at the last 100 years, a lot of that data came into play and became so important because of the Industrial Revolution, and we could now measure things. But I think that tendency to rely so heavily on either data itself or the R&D department or the innovation group, I think it creates two interesting dynamics between organizations. One is that a lot of people say, I'm just not smart enough. I'm not a PhD engineer. I'm not a design thinker. I'm not a fill in the blank kind of requirement. And it lets them off the hook, and I don't understand the data. I'm not the one who collects it. So it almost creates a crutch for everybody else to not even try. And the other one is, that's not my job. I'm not the R&D department. I'm not the innovation group. And so what you have is a 10% of the organization trying to change all of the organization. But actually, research that I came across for my last book that you mentioned, Rethink Innovation, says that 90% of innovation happens outside of those traditional groups that we look to, or just data. And I think that's the really big opportunity that every organization has, that's right in front of them, that they don't even recognize.
What can leaders do in today's world? So we're in the midst of a transformational evolution,
Right.
and driven a lot from by the pandemic. I would say accelerated by the pandemic. I think it would have probably eventually happened, but it's definitely accelerated. So we're transforming, where this is becoming a very digital world. And so a lot of the tasks that were done by people are now done digitally, which is giving people more time to think, time to innovate. How can leaders inspire a culture of innovation within a company?
I think one of the biggest things that leaders can do to inspire this culture is define what innovation means inside that culture. And you mentioned this just a minute ago, Nina, that there are so many different definitions of it. And if leaders want people to perform an action, they need to clearly define what that action looks like so people know what behaviors they should be doing. So if I said to you, let's run down the street, it would be really clear what that behavior is, and what it looks like. But I think a word, an action like innovation, like let's go innovate. Well, what does that mean? And what kind of leeway do I have? And I think everybody in their mind has questions about what it is and how it shows up and what's okay, what those boundaries are. And they're different in every single culture. And what happens is that leaders often ask and even maybe even give people the space to innovate, but they don't define what is it that we want to come out of that space where people have time to think. What does innovation look like? And then I think always telling those stories of innovation, both successful and I think the failures. And I like to reframe failures as, the learnings. What did we learn? Because no innovative idea is always spot on the first time right out of the box. That's just part of the process. And just really realizing that efficiency and innovation don't coexist.
I think about all the successful failures, like the post-it note, like, whiteout, like there were so many things that were done, created almost by accident, but I would say accidentally on purpose, because those things would not have been brought to market unless there was a culture where it was okay to bring those ideas forward somewhere within an organization. So we're sitting at a table and we have established what innovation means, and we're beginning to go through the process. It starts with what? Objectives?
That's where I always like to start, because I think unless you understand what your end goal looks like, you won't know when you get there. And defining what is it that you need new ideas for. So I talk about three parts of an objective statement. We need new ideas too. And this is one that's very common to people. We need new ideas to deliver a better customer experience, better ideas to, develop a product or product enhancement or improve the product. I think those are the things that everybody is very experienced with and familiar with. But the next part of this statement, across the board, when I do this kind of work with teams, either hands-on workers up to executives, to be honest, everybody struggles. And that part is, so we can. what's the ultimate outcome that you want from these ideas? And this kind of clarity, I think the reason it's so hard up front is because you're making a very clear statement of what you want to have happen on the other side. And so all of this struggle, discussion, clarification, focusing up front helps everything move so much smoother down the line. And it avoids things like, wait, I thought what we wanted was X. And somebody else is saying, I thought what we wanted was Y. And somebody else is saying, I thought what we wanted was Q. And nobody has that kind of agreement and clarity on things. And I think that's one of the reasons that innovation and creative thinking can feel like such heavy lifting and hard to do thinking, is because we don't understand what it is that we want out of it. And then ultimately, what are the constraints? I mean, I have a lot of ideas that are amazing ideas, Nina, but they really do have to live in the real world at the end of the day. So ultimately, as we go through the process of coming up with ideas, we'll look at the end, as we start to filter them out, like what really can live in our real world. Is it a budget? Is it a time frame? Is it a customer expectation? They can be very different depending on every circumstance. But I think taking some time up front and being very specific and defining your objective statement is the first place to start.
Okay. Okay. So we now have an objective statement. Again, we're in this room. We know what we're doing. We have clarity. And this is exciting. And we have an open forum. Does everybody just start going, do we start adding on? Do we start looking to be, I've got this idea. No, I've got this idea. Walk us through what that might look like. You're facilitating a workshop on innovation, and you've got this great group of eager people who are wanting to get there. How do they do this?
And what you just described, I think, is the typical reaction. Okay, we know what we want on the other side. So give me all your ideas. And we start with that brainstorm, that strategy session, that whiteboard. And I think some of the things we always hear are, it's a brainstorm session. Like, give me everything. There's no such thing as a bad idea. And we've seen a lot of really awful ideas, and the extroverts rule and the introverts feel overwhelmed and never get a chance to talk. And it's a mess. And people always defer to the highest ranking person in the room because they don't want to look bad or hurt their career. And there's so many interesting human and kind of political dynamics and culture and backstories in everybody's mind about why they won't really share and come share what they think is a great idea, or look to explore something. Maybe it's we only have 30 minutes, so let's just get out what we can get out. And I think what typically happens is people settle for an idea. They don't get inspired by those ideas. And I think the settle for comes because this is our habit. We have a defined amount of time. We have to have something to come out at the other end so that we can move forward, because it takes a long time to move that idea through execution. But the reason it takes a long time to move that idea through execution is because what you needed on the outside wasn't clearly defined first on the inside. And when you invest that time to clearly define your objective statement, it makes the rest of the process so much more efficient that people don't realize. And what typically ends up happening when you jump from the objective statement to the brainstorm is you come up with maybe 8 or 10 ideas at the most, and go for the one that you think whoever has to approve it will approve it, or it will fit your budget. And that's it. And to be honest, none of those ideas are particularly inspired. They're nothing really different. People in the room really think about, well, what's our competitor doing, and how can we kind of take that and put our own spin on it so we're enough different but not too different. And I think the result is just lackluster ideas that nobody's really, really excited about. And when you're looking at how do you make sure you continue to keep that pace of change at least the same on the inside as it is on the outside, that kind of thinking will never, ever get you there.
Okay, so you mentioned the introvert, and you mentioned the person that is concerned about rank, right? So the leader has brought in people from different parts of the organization for this brainstorming idea. Then you've got the person who just wants to hear themselves talk, right?
Right.
And
right.
I know that everybody out there listening is going, "Oh, I've been in those meetings. I know those meetings." How does the leader make sure there's equity of input?
There's a lot of different tools and techniques that you can use, but one of the things I do in those kind of situations when it's very clear that there's one or two people who monopolize the conversation is that I give them some kind of a token, something that looks like a poker chip or, a little Lego person or
Mhm.
something like that. And every time they want to speak, they have 2 minutes. And when they do that, they have to take that token and put it in the middle of the table. So once you've used your tokens, you cannot speak again until everybody else in the room has used those. And I tell you, some of those people, they just about burst because they're not used to this. But that's a big part of innovation, is giving all of the diverse thinkers in the room an opportunity and a space to have those conversations. And generally, when I use this technique, one of the things I hear the most, Nina, is that those big talkers said, I had no idea that this is how that person thought, or this was their
Ah,
perspective. And the ideas are way better than they don't say this, when I usually monopolize the conversation, but they see things in a different light. Now, it doesn't mean that next time they won't monopolize it, because habits are
sure.
habits, but it's a democratic way to give everybody in the room an opportunity to have a part of that conversation.
You mentioned the word diversity, and there is such a movement around the world for diversity, equity, and inclusion in the corporate world everywhere. Ingram Micro, you name it. How much of that is impacting or positively impacting innovation, if at all?
Yeah, and to be honest, it has an incredible impact on innovation, because what has typically happened, and I think this is very true of B2B tech companies, is that the people making the decisions all look the same. Historically, they've
Mhm.
been middle-aged white men. And when you're making decisions for your buyers who are very diverse in their backgrounds, you're missing out on this huge opportunity to serve them, because you don't understand them, because you're not them. You don't have the same childhood experience. You don't have the same cultural background. You don't have the same gender or identity that others have. And so it creates an incredible blindness. And by bringing diverse thoughts, diverse experiences, diverse opinions into the room, it opens up a whole world that oftentimes teams never ever realized was there. And that's something that absolutely can supercharge a team forward. I had worked with a company who developed safety equipment for emergency response and police officers. And I talked to the first woman who joined the team. And she said it was amazing. All of a sudden, these product developers were going, I had no idea this is what it was like. And they had to learn how to design things like bulletproof vests to fit a woman's body versus a man's body, because they're designed very differently. And their approach had been, well, we'll just do the same as a man, just make it in a smaller size. And that doesn't work. And it's that kind of example of when you bring in the different voices and the different experiences, you have much better and much richer material that you come out with.
That is a great example of that diversity of thought and of ideas. Okay, so now we have still in that room, still at that table, and we've used the token and everybody has contributed. And the facilitator, the leader in the meeting is going, these are some really, really good ideas. Now what?
I think one of the things that the facilitator needs to keep in mind is, are we really looking at every nook and cranny of the world around us for inspiration? If you're a B2B tech company, are you looking at consumer kids products for what they do and how they build a community and an audience with their buyers? Are you looking at nonprofits? Are you looking at what's popular on TikTok or the latest social media platform? Because I think unless you really look outside of your own environment, you're missing an incredible opportunity for inspiration. So I think when that facilitator is looking at those ideas, one of the things that they should ask themselves is, how inspired do these ideas feel? And I start with inspired, not realistic, because coming up with great ideas is a process, but it really does have to start with inspiration. And so when we go back to our example of what typically happens is people come up with ideas that are pretty much like their competitors, but a little bit different. This is the way that you really stand out and look different from all of your competition, is taking that inspiration from another industry altogether and really pulling it apart and talking about what is it that made it successful. Because you don't want to just copy it and paste it. That's definitely not what you want to do, but understanding what actually made it successful. So for example, after the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge came out, other nonprofits tried to replicate that and failed miserably because they didn't understand what made that ice bucket challenge successful. It wasn't doing something as drastic as pouring a big bucket of ice over your head. It was about giving people something to share. It was about giving them options, because you could dump the water over your head or you could just write a check. It was about something that they could do more than once. It was about building a community in a way that they hadn't experienced before. So if other nonprofits had looked at how can we relate those ideas into our fundraising, they would have had a very different experience. And that's one of the things that's important as you're looking at drawing out those great ideas, is how inspired do they feel? And then what is it about those inspiration points that you can relate to your own situation?
I absolutely love all of this, because I think it's something that everybody listening, everyone who's a leader in a company, is aspiring, especially in today's world. It's all about technology is important, but humanity is, whew, and what can we do? How do we reach people? How do we connect? I love the word inspiration. All right, give us a little bit of a preview. We've got we're 3 episodes that you're going to be doing with us on B2B Tech Talk. What can we look forward to in the next episode?
The next episode, Nina, we're going to dive into my 5-step process called the Wheel of Innovation. And I teach people how you start to find that inspiration, what it looks like, what to do with it, and then understand the patterns that you relate into your work. And then it's not until step 4 that we look at generating ideas. And I'll give people a very different perspective on what your idea generation meeting or brainstorm or strategy session should actually look like, and why it's very different from what we do today. And then step 5 is understanding how to pitch your idea and give feedback. And I call it the
Ooh.
Wheel of Innovation, because once you've gone through the process, you start right over and you just keep rolling. And that's what helps people become perpetual idea generators.
Ah, I love it. Wash, rinse, and repeat.
Right.
Fantastic. Carla, thank you so much for joining us today. You've given us tremendous insight on the world of innovation, and I look forward to the next episode.
Thank you so much, Nina.
Impactful global engagements, iconic entertainment experiences, and memorable networking opportunities. Be part of it all at Ingram Micro One 2024. You've been listening to Ingram Micro's B2B Tech Talk. Thanks for tuning in. If you like this episode and you want to continue the conversation online, use hashtag B2B Tech Talk.